The pastors who preached revolution. Americans often picture the revolution in uniforms, muskets, drums, powder smoke. They do not always picture pulpits, but long before some men took up arms, others took up Scripture, and told their congregations that liberty was not merely political. It was moral. My name is Benedict. No, not that one. Today, I will tell you about the Black Robe Regiment. The name was not originally a compliment. The Black Robe Regiment was a British insult, a sneer aimed at colonial pastors, especially Presbyterian and Congregational ministers, who wore dark clerical robes and preached with unusual conviction about liberty, tyranny, and the duty of resistance. To the British, these were not merely men of prayer. They were agitators in black cloth. And, for once, the British understood the situation quite clearly. Because the American Revolution was not argued only in assemblies and taverns, it was argued in churches. Week after week, ministers stood before ordinary colonists and made a case that would have startled many Europeans. That government was accountable to God, that rulers were bound by moral law, and that obedience was not owed to power simply because it possessed a crown. This was dangerous teaching. It is one thing to complain about taxes. It is another to persuade a people that resistance to unjust rule may be righteous. These ministers did not all speak with one voice. Some were fiery, some cautious, some political, some deeply theological, but together they helped create the moral language of the Revolution. They preached from Romans 13, the great biblical passage on governing authorities, but they did not read it as a command for blind submission. They argued that legitimate authority must remain just, that rulers who violated fundamental law became something else, not fathers of the people, oppressors of the people. And once that distinction is made, history becomes difficult for tyrants. One of the most famous examples was the Reverend John Witherspoon, Presbyterian minister, president of Princeton, and eventually a signer of the Declaration of Independence. Witherspoon was not merely pious. He was intellectually formidable. He believed liberty required virtue, that self-government required moral seriousness, that a free people without discipline would not remain free for long. He trained students who would shape the early republic. Others preached even more directly. Election sermons, militia sermons, fast day sermons, these became part of the bloodstream of revolutionary thought. The message was not always, "Go to war." Often it was subtler, and perhaps more powerful. That liberty was worth sacrifice. That tyranny was not merely inconvenient, but corrupting. That public courage was a duty. And when enough people begin hearing politics described in moral terms, they stop thinking of history as something happening far away. They begin to think they are answerable for it. Now, let us be careful here. The Black Robe Regiment was not a formal organization with membership cards and weekly strategy meetings in some candlelit basement. It was a later label for a real pattern. Pastors using the pulpit to shape the conscience of resistance. That matters, because revolutions do not succeed by muskets alone. Men may fight for many reasons: anger, pride, fear, revenge. But to endure suffering, hunger, uncertainty, and death, people often require something deeper than outrage. They require meaning. The clergy helped provide that meaning. They framed the struggle not as mere rebellion, but as moral duty. Not as chaos, but as ordered resistance. Not as hatred of Britain, but as fidelity to principle. And that, I think, is why the story endures. The American Revolution was not simply a tax dispute that escalated. It became, in the colonial imagination, a question of conscience. Could a free people submit indefinitely to power they believed unlawful? Could they answer to God and still bow to arbitrary rule? The pastors of the Black Robe Regiment did not settle those questions by themselves, but they helped a scattered people think of liberty as something sacred enough to defend. That is no small contribution. It is, in fact, one of the great hidden forces in the founding. Empires often understand force. What they fear, more quietly, is conviction. A people can endure much: taxes, delays, insults, but once they are persuaded, that resistance is not merely permitted, but righteous. History changes. The Black Robe Regiment did not win the Revolution alone, but they helped teach Americans. That liberty was not only a political inheritance, it was a moral responsibility, and sometimes a road to independence does not begin with a musket shot, but with a sermon.